why you feel, with your experience, that boundaries are so critically important for people to master.
So I always start with just what is it? It's basically your own personal rules of engagement, right? It's how we let other people know what's okay with us and what's not okay with us. Your boundaries are made up of your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers. So it's not enough to just know what those are. You have to know them and then have the capacity and capability to communicate them when you so choose. So I feel like it's this very unknown but super important aspect of our lives and of our success.
Welcome back to another episode of the Candy Valentino Show. Thanks so much for tuning in and spending this time with us today as I finally get to bring on, we've been trying to bring on Terri Cole for quite some time, but she has been writing and she's got this incredible book out. And so I'm finally so glad that we're able to connect. Terri, thanks so much for being here today.
I'm so happy we finally did it, Candy.
Yes. And gosh, you obviously have decades of experience. You do a ton of work as a psychotherapist and a relationship expert. And you talk about something I think is so important for people to master, not just in their personal lives, but even in business and as it relates to every area. So I always love to open up with just some quick value for people. So can you share of why you feel, why you started your first book? Obviously, you have more work that's coming out. Why you feel, with your experience, that boundaries are so critically important for people to master.
Well, we can start with why people don't know very much about them and how this is something that for women in particular, it's such a source of pain, but we don't know what the source of pain is. We're exhausted. We're burnt out. We feel taken advantage of. We feel we're overextended. We feel like people are entitled. And I mean, listen, why did I get into this? Because personally, I was a boundary disaster. And I didn't know that so much of the pain that I was experiencing in my young life in my 20s and how I felt in my relationships, like people were taking advantage of me. I was feeling underappreciated. And I didn't realize until I had a bunch of therapy that what was really happening was that my boundaries were disordered. And when you think about what we learn about boundaries, we don't learn much. You don't learn it at home. You don't learn it in school. And actually, we sort of learn the opposite, where it's like, be a good girl, turn that frown around. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? Like, this is the messaging that most people, certainly in the age group 40s and 50s, had growing up. So women don't know how to effectively set boundaries. And I think we should establish what they are, what they even are. I can't tell you how many times people just go, right, like, what are boundaries? What do I need to be working on? What am I not doing? So I always start with just what is it? It's basically your own personal rules of engagement, right? It's how we let other people know what's okay with us and what's not okay with us. And the way that I teach it and theorize it basically is that your boundaries are made up of preferences, your desires, your limit, and your deal breaker. So it's not enough to just know what those are. And I promise you, most women who come into my therapy practice don't know. But it's not even enough to know them. You have to know them and then have the capacity and capability to communicate them when you so choose. So that is the problem of what I saw happening in my therapy practice. It wasn't just me, right, who had this experience. It was like, I opened a therapy practice after being a talent agent for years. I went back to school and changed careers. And every person who walked in the door, it's like they're presenting problem 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, I could connect it to disordered boundary. So I feel like it's this very unknown, but super important aspect of our lives and of our success. It's not just personal. And so much of this has to do with, how do you build an empire with disordered boundaries? Well, there's a glass ceiling that you're going to hit, and that's your own glass ceiling because of disordered boundaries, according to me.
I love that. I think it's such an important conversation. And why do you think, because I do see that pattern, and I often feel like we're not, in my 40s, like we're not that far away from the generations of women that didn't have a lot of options. We didn't have the options to go be anything that we wanted and start a business. I mean, the SBA wasn't even lending out money to women, female-owned businesses until the late 80s, which is like mind-blowing to think about, that you needed a signature prior to. So when you really go back and look at history, you can kind of understand, doesn't make it okay, right? But we can at least understand that we're not that far away generationally from the women that didn't have any options. Do you feel that that is part of why we never learned boundaries, because the women that came before us didn't even have the ability to even have them?
Absolutely. And it's funny, I always talk about and write about this exact thing, that when you think about it, even if you think about 100 years ago, women were property. Like, we're not talking, that's not that long ago. And you're right. I mean, you're talking even in the 70s, right? A woman couldn't get a credit card without her husband, right? Think about that now. It seems unfathomable, but it's not. And so the reality is, with boundaries, I feel like you're right. Part of what happened, at least this is my armchair theory, is that when opportunities started opening up and women were fighting for more rights to have better careers in particular, right? Not only just be a nurse, a secretary, a teacher, because for a long time, those were the three appropriate careers for women. We're like, dude, no, like I want to do other things. So when it started opening up and there were other things that we could do coming, anything, it really started being, women could become engineers, becoming physicians and all of those things. But there was this, I think, this unconscious fear that if we need help at home, if we don't now do what we want to say is, give us these opportunities because we're so hungry for them and we want a different life, or we'll still do all the domestic labor. Don't worry. The kids will still have it together and the food will still be in the fridge. And where the inequity that exists still in a lot of homes and certainly a lot of countries, but if we're just talking about the US, of division of emotional labor, right? Who's making sure the toilet paper is replaced? Who's buying the end of the year gifts for the teachers? Who makes sure that the teeth get cleaned on the kids? And all of those things. This is not paid and undervalued. And yet it's literally the work that keeps our world going. And so, again, I feel like, yes, we got these opportunities, especially white women, right? We're really talking with women of color, their opportunities for better careers lagged far behind women. They were still fighting for civil rights and those types of things. But if you look at it, the whole trajectory of how we got to where we are, there is a deeply, deeply embedded fears, beliefs, myths around what it means to have good boundaries. Right? Like, people are like, I don't want someone to think I'm bitchy, and I don't want someone to think I'm bossy. And this whole thing about if a woman leads, she's not feminine. Right? And these are outdated, and so much of the time, because we're so blessed to live where we live and do what we do, you want to think, oh, it's really not like that. Oh, it really is. It actually really is. And so learning the language of boundary is so incredibly important. And I really liken it to learning any language that nobody ever taught you. You wouldn't feel bad about yourself, right? You wouldn't be like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not fluent in Russian? I really want to be, right? You'd be like, I will get a teacher. I'm going to get a book. I can learn it. And this is exactly the same. So I always say, wherever you are in your boundary journey, you're in the perfect place, right? Don't sweat what you didn't know. You know now, right? You know now that there's something you can learn. And the way that I wrote the book itself, I have a book and a workbook out. So the Boundary Boss workbook came out in October, and then the book has been out for about a year and a half, 2 years. It's really from the beginning to the end. So how some books you could be like, I'm just going to open it up. But the actual book itself is the same exact way that I've been teaching my courses for many years because it's the way that people learn. So the truth is, it doesn't matter where you are. Wherever you are, you're in the right and perfect place to start to become more fluent in the language of boundaries.
I love how you put that, because as somebody that talks about money, same thing. It's not something we learn. So then we have all this shame and guilt and, oh my gosh, I don't know these things. I should know them. It's like, nope, because we don't know what we don't know. And so it's so important to just know that, like, the shame and the guilt isn't going to help you create this and learn this new language. So I love that you share that, because I think that's so important, because it's not like there's anything wrong with you, because none of us learned these things, which is why, to your point, a lot of people are overwhelmed and burn out, and even maybe find themselves in bad relationships, whether that's intimate relationships or friendships. That little umbrella there, burnout, overwhelm, exhausted, poor relationship, bad friendship, do you think, is that all under the umbrella of those can be maybe not eradicated, but limited with proper boundaries?
Without a doubt. And what you're really talking about for a lot of the over-functioning, over-giving, almost over-feeling, right? Being overly accommodating to people, feeling overly responsible for the feeling states, relationships, circumstances, situations of other people. That is all disordered boundaries, but that is under the sub-umbrella of codependence.
That's interesting.
So if we talk a little bit about the next book that I'm writing actually right now, that comes out at the, towards the end of this year, is called 2 Months. And it's about high functioning codependency, which is actually a coin that I termed, because the codependency itself, like, my clients were like, no, lady, I'm not dependent on anybody, right? I'm making all the money. I'm the one everyone comes to. I'm the rock in my family. There's no way, because we have this, again, this idea of codependency as like the long-suffering wife of the alcoholic husband who, whatever, right? That's not necessarily what it is. And the reason why I came up with this new term is because my highly capable therapy clients and coaching clients did not see themselves under the umbrella of codependency. So if you can't identify the thing that is causing the pain, how are we going to fix the pain? How are we going to change behavior? How are we going to learn something? If you're like, that's not me. I was like, no, but that's definitely you. So as soon as I changed the term to be high functioning codependency, and it's not exactly the same, it actually is a different flavor of codependency, which it's interesting. It's really women of this generation who we were born late enough to get a lot of the benefit of the more equitable world business-wise, where we're both entrepreneurs, we both do what we do. And I think that where I see this in my clientele is the women are so highly capable. Like, they make it look so easy. They're doing all the things for all the people. And everyone's like, Candy's fine. She's always fine. Terry's fine. She's fine. Why? Because we are, in one respect, right? There's not much, I don't know, with my high functioning codependent clients, and even with myself, there was a lot of hyper independence that came with that. Not necessarily wanting to rely on other people, not feeling like I could, not wanting to be vulnerable to other people, not wanting to owe other people. There was a lot of stuff that came around this. But again, what is the foundation of high functioning codependency, or any codependency, is disordered boundaries. So as you get better at knowing your boundaries, right? Your preferences, limits, desires, deal breakers. Once you start really knowing them, it's easier to speak to them, realizing that it's what you prefer actually is important for the people in your life to know. And so much of the time, women will be like, no fuss, no muss, you know me, but I'm good, I'm easy. I'm like, are you easy? Or are you just so afraid of conflict, or so afraid that someone else isn't going to want to do the thing that you want to do and you can't deal with that, or you don't want a confrontation? And I feel like a lot of us have been trained to be like, the more compliant to a degree that you are, the more feminine, the more of a good woman you are. If you would give the shirt off your back. And it's like, that's not really being healthy, you know?
It's interesting because I'm sure there's people that hear that and it's like, okay, well, that I feel like that I relate to that a little bit. But I also, maybe they're like, but I also do want to be kind and I do want to be easygoing and I don't, not even that I want to appear like a bitch, but I just genuinely don't want to be one, right? Because there is a difference. Like, how do you have boundaries and then also not become so demanding? Because and this might be just me, I feel like there's a balance there, right? Like I think sometimes it could be because you can go to the other side where it's not just boundaries, it's actually narcissism, that everyone needs to do and say what you want because these are your rules, right? It's like, where is the line? So maybe if we can speak to the person first that identifies that, okay, I feel like I need a little bit more, but I do genuinely care about other people and I don't want to go to so far on the extreme.
I'm so glad that you asked that because it's so interesting that I cannot tell you how many times when I'm talking about boundaries, I get this question early on. Like, how can I set boundaries and not be a bitch? But this speaks to us. This speaks to the fear that we have. This speaks to the myths that are out there. And there is truth in some people taking it to the extreme. There's no doubt. Like what you said, there's valid, but having boundaries, you can always do it with kindness, right? You can always do it. Talking about yourself. Like if you're demanding something from someone, that's not a boundary. That's a manipulation, right? And I think that a lot of times there's confusion between the two because when we're talking about boundaries, we're talking about your right? What do our boundaries do? They protect us. They protect our relationships because we're not saying yes when we really want to say no out of fear of rejection because we're a people pleaser. Like, think about it. People will always say to me, but I said that just to be nice, or I want to be nice. And I'm like, okay, but let's get clear about what is nice. Not telling the truth about how you feel to someone under the guise of being nice is most definitely not, right? It is misleading. We're giving corrupted data to the people in our life about who we are. And you don't have to go to the other extreme and be like, how other people will use honesty, and I'm putting big quotes around that, as like a big stick to just beat you in the face with, right? Like their idea of honesty. You're like, no, that's just you wanting to tell me that you hate my outfit. Like, there's no need. It's just you judging me. And I think that there's a lot of misuse of the term boundaries, and people will use it as a manipulation tactic themselves to get other people to acquiesce to what they want, to do what they want. So someone had written into me and said, my boyfriend has a boundary that when I go out with my friends, I need to text him once an hour because he feels insecure. And I was like, dude, that's not a boundary. That's just, you just use the word boundary next to a control, right? Coercive control situation and called it a boundary, but it isn't that, right? If we speak about, our needs, our wants, our preferences, you can make a simple request. Hey, can you make sure to, if you get in touch if you're going to be later than midnight, something reasonable, because I worry about you driving late. That would be like a normal thing to be worried about. That wouldn't be controlling, right? That would be, and somebody say, listen, I've been driving my whole life and I don't need to. I mean, but I feel like there are ways that you can speak to your own. If you have the emotional knowledge that you're insecure, but of course this guy didn't. And I don't mean, of course, because he's a guy. I just mean in the situation I was actually dealing with, or he wouldn't have said it that way.
Right.
Because if he had emotional, intelligence about himself, he'd be able to say, I don't know why. I get sort of jacked up when you go out with your friends. I feel worried happen or someone's going to hit on you. And I don't know. I think it's just, I'm afraid to lose you. That you wouldn't need to ask the person to text you once an hour if you were in touch enough with your feelings to talk about them, Yeah. So I do think that the being worried about the pendulum going the other way, I just want to reassure anyone who's interested in getting better at this, that there's absolutely nothing. It's so loving, actually, To set boundaries is loving. To tell the truth about who you are and let the people who love you honestly know who you are, that is like the most loving thing that you can do. When we placate people, when we manage people, right? That's not loving. And so if you're not setting boundaries, you're doing something else, because we have our needs, right? We have our desires, we have our wants. And if you're not setting boundaries in a direct way, you're finding other ways. Like, we'll do it indirectly if we have to, right? Because we need what we need. I may say I'm going to go to that early morning baby shower because my friend asked me, even though I didn't want to do it from the beginning and I wasn't even close to the person. And then I may just conveniently get a migraine that morning. Think about, and then I won't feel good about doing that. Back in the day, that would be a pattern I would have in my life. I would overcommit. And then I knew, I'm like, you couldn't say no in the moment, but you friggin' knew you were going to find a way to not do this thing that you did not want to do. And there's really something about being a person who keeps their word, right? Do what you say you're going to do. And having clear boundaries means having clear agreement. Business everywhere, right? So everyone, we all know, we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that it's interesting. You touched on something that I always say is you're saying about honesty. And I always think being authentic and being honest doesn't give you permission to be an asshole, right? Like there's a fine line there. But I think that when, on the flip side, when somebody isn't communicating their boundaries and they are placating, I think that's also another form of almost passive manipulation. It's like, I'm going to try to manipulate you into being my friend, right? Or for you to like me in some way. But so I'm going to do things that I don't want to do and show up in a way I don't want to show up in hopes that you're going to like me. And then you're going to like me for someone that I'm not, which is the biggest disaster that then you can have, right? It's like people that in an early stage relationship, let me be who you need me to be, and then be mad when down the road you're not happy with who I really am because I sold you a bill of goods of who I really wasn't, right? And then we get in these crazy 8 patterns. So, let's say someone's listening, they understand they didn't develop these because maybe we had a mother figure that didn't develop these, or a mother figure that told us, I know my mom's like, do you want to be a teacher or a nurse? So when you said that, I was cracking up in my mind because like those are the 2 things, right? And then it was like, well, no, I want to start a business. Well, oh, you can't do that. So we get these things in our brain. Someone that listens to that didn't have boundaries, but realizes, you know what? Terri is speaking to me. I realize that I don't have this, or I am highly functioning, but codependent. What are some of the first few things that they can start to do on their own to maybe just start to bring the control back a little bit?
Okay, so the first thing that I think is most important is we have to identify where we need boundaries right now. And we can do that most simply by taking a resentment inventory. Super simple. Literally, get a piece of paper and think about the important or even marginal relationships in your life. Because a lot of times we'll hold resentment for like people who are not even in our VIP section. And we're like, why am I dealing with crap from people who are not even that important to me? And so write down, I'm feeling resentment, let's say, towards my sister because whatever she did or didn't do. And then we start to really look and go, okay, so what do I need to do in this scenario? Is this happening because I haven't spoken up? Have I spoken up and this person still is trampling on my boundary, right? That's more of a repeat offender situation, which is a little bit different. But so much of the time when we first do an initial resentment inventory around boundaries, what we find is that there's a lot of things that we can do to remedy those situations. And it's not a lot. A lot of times it's simply speaking up. And what I give you in the book and all the Boundary Bootcamp course that I teach is a million scripts, right? A million scripts that you can make your own. I'd like to make a simple request. If you want to borrow my clothing, you ask me first and don't just come to my house and take it because it makes me not want to share clothes with you anymore. Or whatever the thing is. There's always language. And part of why I think there's so much fear about going the other way and being too aggressive is that we wait too long. So a lot of times this is the experience people have. We're stuffing, and then exploding. And then the person's like, well, that person is a boundary bully. And you're like, those are disordered boundaries, right? Not telling the truth or suppressing and then exploding. It's super common, but it's not. It really is avoidable. Like, you can actually learn to dial into how you feel. So that's the first thing that we're going to talk about, is people doing a resentment inventory and then really getting honest with themselves. Have you given this person a chance to change their behavior? Do they even know how you feel? What positive or proactive actions can you take to remedy what you're being resentful about? Because a lot of times, especially when I was in my 20s, when I was over-functioning and over-giving and over-delivering, doing all the things, I really felt like other people were entitled. That was my experience. Like, oh, you have all these expectations of me. And what I really got to in my own therapy, like, was Betty entitled, or was I serving myself up on a silver platter and hoping that Betty would be like, oh no, it's okay. Like, I'm presenting something like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And then feeling resentment about it. Why are you saying you would do it? Right? You don't have to say you would do it.
Yeah.
Funny, I was talking to one of my girlfriends. This is like 15 years ago. She reminded me of this the other day. We were walking in New York. Her name is Kate Norther. We were walking to an event, and she was complaining to me about this person who she had already done a lot of things for them business-wise. And they asked her again to be on another thing or panel or whatever it was. And the whole 10 minutes, she was like, what's wrong with people? Who raises them? Why are they like this? And then we got to where we were going. And I don't even remember this, but she told me, I said, oh yeah, Kate, she's really awful, putting you in the position to have to say no. And she was like, wow, my God.
Wow.
I was like, dude.
Yeah.
She was like, oh my God, Terri, can I?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Isn't that amazing that sometimes we just, no matter how healed you are, how much therapy, sometimes we just need to be reminded of that too. You know, and you said something, and this might even have been a post that you shared recently as we were doing some research, but you talked a lot about too, like, we're talking about friends or, you know, maybe other people, but do you feel that this applies also to people that are related to you? And I'd love to know, if you disagree with me, this is fine, but I always say, like, just because you're related to me by blood does not give you access to me, right? Because I think sometimes that we are related to people, but we've been told, well, that's your so-and-so, go give them a hug, or that's your this or that, or, you know, that's Santa Claus, go sit on their laps. And you're not comfortable for whatever reason, whether it's valid or not, right? To have this person either as a VIP, as you said, in your life, or just have access to your energy, your thoughts, your space. One, I'd love to know if you feel that that's okay to not have people that are related to you have access to you. And then also, how do you have those conversations, or how do you start to compartmentalize that if you think that that's okay?
I definitely highly recommend curating your VIPs. So, right, this is exactly as you said, Candy, like, who has what level of access to you? And the people, according to me, who should have high level access have to be high priority people where there's mutuality, where I'm filling up your bucket, you're filling up my bucket, I'm not judging you. I can easily say no to you if I don't feel like doing something, and you're not mad at me. Some weird, I'm keeping tabs on you, or I'm bean counting, it's your turn type of a thing. And family in particular, I know that there's a lot of cultural beliefs and cultural belief systems that say all family should be in your VIP section, and in my course, I fully teach that that's not accurate, because what we need to do is we need to look at all people and go, who are emotionally safe people, who are not emotionally safe. And I don't care, the emotionally unsafe people, I don't care who they are to you, they should be in the mezzanine, and that's okay. They don't need bottle service in the VIP section. They don't. Because if they're not trusted, why would we let them close to our most tender heart? Right? It doesn't mean you have to cut them off. It doesn't mean you have to, you don't even have to have the conversation. You have to have behavior that is in line with your truth. Which if you don't, part of I start the book off telling a story that I was a bridesmaid 8 times in my 20s. And probably 4 of those ugly dress experiences I should have said no thank you to, because there were people who I was like, I cannot believe I'm one of the top 4 most important people in your life. Because if I had a housewarming party, you wouldn't even be invited. And even then, I didn't say no. Of course, I would obviously never, there was, decades ago, I would never do that now, but I didn't feel like I could. Through the therapeutic process and through understanding about boundaries and valuing your time, your energy, your bandwidth, you realize that being in your life is a friggin' honor and a privilege. People who get to be close to you, that's earned, right? That's like, not everyone needs to get that 24-hour backstage pass. They really don't. And you're the only bouncer. Therein lies the rub, is that with your VIP section, you're the one who's got to be making the guest list. So how do we do it? Right? Back to sort of the practical question of how do you do it? If your third cousin once removed asks you to be a bridesmaid in her wedding, you say you can't. You say no. You say it's not a good time. You say, especially if you're not close to them, right? If you don't want to do it, it's okay to not do it rather than doing it resentfully. So you'll take your time. I have a 4-step process that we talk about. We figure out where we need the boundary. We figure out who, really look at who the person is. So if it's a boundary that we can be premeditated, right, with, then we go, okay, this person is not a morning person, so I won't have the conversation then. Or this person's very defensive, so I'm going to be, gentle language, my energy when I come into it or whatever. So then we come up with an actual script. You write down what you're going to say. I've had the hardest conversation in the world in the last 15 years of my life with so many different people that, when I was in my 20s, I'd be like, never. I could literally never do that. But what ends up happening is that you deepen the intimacy in your relationship. People know where they stand with you. Those weddings that I was in, I was pretending that I was closer to those people in my heart than I was. I was play acting in some weird way. I mean, I literally didn't think I had a choice. I felt like it would be too rude to say no to the honor of being in someone's hopefully one and only wedding, but I wouldn't do that now. I would go, oh, they definitely think we're closer than I feel. And I'm not interested. I'm not dedicated to them enough to want to do what's required to be in someone's wedding. So I think that really the first step is really giving yourself permission to only have people close to you who you really won't harm you, right? Because think about family. Sometimes they're the biggest offenders,
Yeah, and it's so important. It's interesting too, you were saying about the bridesmaid, like that analogy where if it's a bridesmaid or somebody from work or, going out for brunch or whatever it may be, what I find very difficult still, and I have pretty good boundaries, I still find difficult when someone's, for whatever reason, makes up something in their mind, right, that maybe we're closer than I ever thought we were. And then all of a sudden I realize that that's their perception, but yet I still have boundaries. And now they want you to have boundaries, but not when they affects them, right? Because now they think that they're somehow closer to you just by you being kind or trying to include or whatever, maybe a work situation. I still to this day struggle with how to manage expectations, I guess, as a result of being kind and friendly to people, that then they think they have access to you. Does that make sense?
It totally does. But I want to kind of roll it back to the intention, your own intention to include people, right? Because we like to be liked, right? I don't know about you, I think you're a people person. And it doesn't mean you have to be a people pleaser, right? But you're out here, you're doing this, right? It's like there's something about that. So we have to look at our own motive. We invite people to be inclusive, you said, let's say, that was an example, and then they got the wrong idea. The way that you can handle that is the next time they go, they invite you to do something that to you go like family dinner or something where you're like, hi, no, thank you. You have to say no, right? Part of it is our behavior of how we feel about that person. There's nothing wrong with being nice. How they interpret your niceness is their side of the street. If they come back to you and say, I want you to be in my wedding now because you included me and we're best friends, you would then absolutely have to say, that is so nice of you. What an honor it is to be invited. And yet I cannot with my schedule and the travel, and I hope it goes great, right? You cannot. So I think that part of it is honestly looking at what are our own behavior potentially, right? Because there's in every situation, there's always a little gem of like self-wisdom that we could get, like, what is it that put this person over the edge to think that we were besties? And I'm not saying we're responsible for that, but I always like to look to go, hey, there might have been something I could have done different, and this person I wouldn't be in this pickle that I'm in right now, feeling weird and having to have this conversation. Once you do that, though, as long as your behavior is aligned with how you actually feel going forward, you're not going to be, it doesn't matter. You're not responsible for their misperception or their misinterpretation. Stay true to, you can be nice and you can not have drinks with them on the weekend. You can treat them respectfully and with kindness and not want to have a girl's getaway with them. That's your truth. And I think when you're a friendly person, and you are, and I am too, a lot of times, and because you're also an empath, I have no doubt that we're dialed into the feeling states of all the people. And so if you am I making sense to you?
Yes, completely.
Okay. Because I just see it in my mind so clearly, where it's like some people are more invisible to other people. But when you're an empath or a highly sensitive person, we sort of see everybody. And that can be misinterpreted as something else.
Right.
So anyway, I don't know. That was a long way around the barn. I think I answered the question.
Yeah, no, it was good. And I just wanted to open up too, because I think oftentimes people think like when they see you in one way that you've got it all figured out 100% of the time. And so I think it's good so that like even when you know how to do this, there's still situations that trip people up, and and I am always self-aware that I try to go back and be like, oh, could I have done this differently? Should I have said this differently? And then make better decisions moving forward. And I think that's important for the work that you do, because somebody can have this dialed in today, and then 6 months down the road, something can happen and they are like, oh shoot, I should have held that boundary in a different way. So I feel like it's an ongoing process for people to understand, just like you said, learning a language, that you can understand the fundamentals, but to really be fluent in it, you almost need to have the data, the experience in all of these different ways to make that decision better in the future, is kind of what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. It's so true. And things can happen in life that will have you slip back into old disordered boundary behavior. Family crisis. Right? Things happen where we're human beings. So we may not be able to hold our boundaries in the same way. And yet it's okay. The more you know what to do, you forgive yourself, you go, okay, this was a stressful situation. I'll do it better next time. Let me learn from this, right? It really is okay. But I think that the biggest thing, though, Candy, that I want people to take away is that having healthy boundaries is really loving. It's how we have authentic relationships. It's how people really know us, And so I really want this myth of having good boundaries equating to being mean and bossy and bitchy. I really want it to go away, because it isn't true. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I promise you, if somebody is a bully, they don't have good boundaries. That's just, there's two extremes of boundaries. We have the too rigid boundaries and the too porous, which is malleable or soft or meltable boundaries. These are the two extremes. So if someone is a bossy bitch, they're not a good, they're not a healthy, they're not a boundary boss. That's just a boundary book. And over here, you might fall into a category of more being like a peacekeeper or a pushover, right? I actually have a boundary quiz that it's free. People can go to it. It's just boundaryquiz.com, where there's archetypes, and you only answer 13 questions, and it will give you your archetype. And I did a whole video for each archetype, and I feel like people, I mean, I think probably 60,000 people have already gone through this.
Amazing.
And we got really good feedback, because it'll help if you're wondering where you are. This will help you go, oh, okay, here's my archetype. Meaning, if you're more of a porous boundaries archetype, then it gives you ideas of what you can do. And if you're more of a rigid boundary archetype, there are other things that you could do, but they would be different, right? Because they're two ends of the spectrum.
I love that. We'll link all that up too, so everyone that's watching and listening can do that. Right. Do you feel, because just to touch on your next book, because that is so different for you to change that term, high functioning codependency, because you're right. Like originally when you were talking about codependency, I was like, oh, like you automatically think of a specific type of person. So then you would filter yourself out if you're high functioning, if you're successful, right? So I think that's so fascinating. Yep. Is there a correlation between high functioning codependency not being healed or in recovery, whatever the proper term is, and lack of boundaries? Is there a correlation there, or is it a boundary bully? Is the other side of it?
Both.
Both.
It's actually both or either, right? So when part of the way it manifests for high functioning codependent is that we're very active doing things. We are the doers. We want to get stuff done. We are the auto advice givers. We are the auto accommodators. We are the, but we're also like getting stuff done in life, right? Because we're hard workers, most of us. We're like willing to do whatever it takes. So when you think about how it's different, you're still suffering, because if you are a high functioning codependent, you are still overly invested in the feeling state, the outcome, the relationships, the circumstances of the people in your life, to the detriment of your own internal peace. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. And does that all stem from is there a connection when you see a high functioning someone that's high functioning codependency as opposed to codependency? Did that stem in childhood, in the environment? Is that a behavior of a parent? Is that typically where it comes from?
I mean, they both come from childhood, right? All really codependency. And it doesn't mean you can't become codependent later in life. You can. But what I find is that people in my practice, it's how they reacted naturally to their circumstances, whether it was a chaotic family system, an alcoholic family system, whatever the situation was. Maybe it was really authoritarian. All of these things can create us relating to other people in this disordered fashion. We think that our worth is what we do, how much we do. We need to be utilitarian in our relationships. But where I see the similarity of my therapy client, and 25 years in the trenches is what I've been doing this. So over and over, it's like how HFCs react, high functioning codependent, react to their environment. A lot of times is to accept. So it's the ones who are like, I'm going to be the athlete. I'm going to get straight A's. I'm doing something. And all of that doing is helping me avoid feelings or fears or whatever it is that's happening at home. I'm really, a lot of times people come from narcissistic family systems. And like when you think about that, just every person in that system besides the narc is just trying to get out of there. Just trying to get out and survive. But I do see the similarity. It's not that they're inherently different. It's that how they react to their circumstance is more like forward motion. And I also, another thing that I noticed that is different is that with codependence, where we're more traditionally thinking about like codependent no more or someone addict, and enabling them, which trust me, HFCs enable as well. But we have a different, there's a different vibe on what it is that you're doing. So if you're with an addict, you are suffering, right? You're more on the being controlled in some way by their behavior. And with high functioning codependency, we're working overtime to control other people's outcomes and their feelings too. But we're so highly capable. A lot of times we can do it for a long time successfully. So, another thing I wanted to say is that the traditional one is more like just romantic relationships, kind of, and family relationships. Where I see with HFCs, we're more not necessarily codependent with the world, but kind of, where we could just meet someone. I mean, I literally met someone at a rape crisis training weekend, and she was in an abusive marriage, and I was telling her to, of course, I was young, I was in my 20s. I was like bossing, telling her to get out. She didn't need to put up with that. And then she called me like 4 days later and was like, I took your advice and I'm leaving. Can I come stay with you just for a little bit? And I was like, wow, person I knew for literally 13 hours. Wow. Okay, because I didn't know how to say no. And she came with like 6 bags and her dog to my 600 square foot West 95th Street, New York City apartment that doesn't allow animals. Like, it was nice.
Wow.
But I tell that story because the point is that there's an over responsibility that codependents in general will feel in their relationships. And what I see with high functioning codependents is that we can feel that way about love.
That's fascinating. Or even just the world at large, in a sense, like,
yes.
Like I'm just self-reflecting here, just transparently. Like, I'm like, wow, that's kind of what I do in the world at large. Like, whether it's a person suffering, I have a nonprofit, we rescue animals. So like, just imagine, like every animal you see, you feel somehow responsible. And then when you can't help, you feel like that lack of being unable to help is now you're failing that person or that animal. Like, it's a lot. It feels like a lot of responsibility. It's just, I would have never thought of it as a codependency behavior. I thought it more was like a responsible behavior, right? Like what the responsible person should be doing to help the world and make everything better. But I guess it's then you're taking a lot of that responsibility on, which can manifest in poor behaviors in some areas, right? Because you don't have boundaries around what you can really focus on and go all in and support is kind of what I'm feeling.
And it's so good that what you just said it really speaks to the exact point we were just talking about. But I want to make, talk about a nuance of the feeling overly responsible, right? For animals, for people who are suffering. You're in a small percentage of folks who will do something about it, right? I have to say, HFCs are really good at doing something about it, right? Actually putting skin in the game and doing something. Where it would help, I think, you to have better internal boundaries is there has to be a point where we let the chips fall where they may, where we know what our limits are, right? What we can do, where we look at the good work we've done and go, okay, this is great. I am making a difference. And it's so hard when you have a sensitive heart and when you're, I totally just feel bad. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
That it's difficult. But the unrest that you feel inside of you is the cost. And so part of it is that there can be less of that, right? Where we have to learn, and it took me so many years in therapy to learn to just put it down, to go, I can't, whether it's save my friend or save my sister, I can be here when they want to change. I can be supportive. But me worrying or having knots in my stomach or ruminating about what I could have done better or more or what I could still do right now, that is so much leading bandwidth, and it's really not helping them,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's an important thing to learn and understand after doing deep rescue work for 15 years and, not, leaving my business, it's time to like go all in and like go undercover in these, slaughter auctions and all this crazy stuff. For so long, you realize that what happens is you pour out so much that you've got nothing left. And then unfortunately what happens too is Someone said to me once, like, Candy, you can cure cancer and someone will still have a problem with how you did it, how long it took, how much money you spent, right? And it's so true. And in the nonprofit world, the same thing applies. Like, you can be on the front line, donating millions of dollars, doing all the things, and it's still, you didn't do enough. You didn't help in the right way. You didn't, you did it for the wrong intention. And I think that's really important for people to remember too with boundaries, is that knowing who you are and allowing other people to have their opinions of you and not trying to settle the score, I think is one of the most powerful things we can learn to do as humans.
Yep.
And not let that rattle your self-worth and really your inner validation. Yep. The work you're doing is so critically important. I know I still have ways to go as well, but I think that just the evolution of 20 years, like you said, from your 20s to your 40s, if you do the work and you really start to understand who you are and who you're not, and being okay with both, you can really start to make even a bigger difference in the world or in your family or in your community, because you're able to fill yourself up to have more energy and bandwidth to even serve in a bigger way, is what I find.
Absolutely. And you're not self-sacrificing, right? It doesn't have to be either or. And I think that when we're very high functioning and capable, we just feel like it's endless. Like, I'll never stop, like, until I get that thing done, whatever that thing is. Like, I'll just keep on going. But really, there's a better way, which is having downtime, giving yourself a chance to rest, treating yourself with the same care and concern you would the animals you love, a little kid. Right? I would never expect anyone else to work the way that I have in my life. I would not want it. I would not want a child to do it. It's too much. I mean, I'm way better now, but you know what I mean? Like, there really is something to think about, because there's a cost in all of that doing, even when we're doing good work. But we can do both. We can do good work and we can take care of ourselves and have good balance.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing too, is like, if you really learn this and adopt it and apply it, then you actually can go longer. Because I think when you don't have the bound, I don't know about you, but for me, the only thing that would like literally stop me is like a massive migraine or get really sick where my body could no longer perform. That's the only time I stopped. But I realized if I did a little bit less or a little less intensity, I could go for longer and not have one of those events take me out. And so I think it's a fascinating thing for people to learn that, okay, if you really want to do a lot, if you just learn some of these principles, you can actually do a little more because you're taking care of yourself along the way. And that's what I think is that massive burnout is what at least I've had in my life, and so many people have, is you're just like, your nervous system completely just shuts down because it can't process anything more. And I think that's all avoidable. And that's what's so important with what you do. Anyone listening, they want to work with you. They want to learn more about this. They know that it's something that they need to understand and get fluent in. What's the best way to start that conversation with working with you?
You can go to my website, terricole.com. You can check me out on Instagram. I have a course called Boundary Bootcamp, which really I walk you through the entire thing, step by step. It's an 8-week course that I've been teaching for many years, and I changed, I update it every single. And actually, for anyone who wants the book, the truth is, if you do the book, you will, when that book is done, you will absolutely know I've said that. No doubt.
I love it. Well, I have the book. I don't have the workbook. So that's going to be my next step, because I think that's so fascinating to be able to do them together. So guys, we'll link all the information below, terricole.com. The book is Boundary Boss. And then Terri has a great book coming out in the fall. So depending on when you're watching this, thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing. I think that if we had a society, a country, a world that did more work with what you talk about, I just think overall we would be better as a society. So thank you for spending 25 years in doing this and for sharing it with the world, because it's so needed.
Thank you so much for having me, Candy.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate you.